Welcome to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast, where we share all things people stuff in leadership. Learn from leaders who have done the hard yards and learn from experience. Hear from expert authors about the latest insights from culture to strategy and messy people dynamics. Get tips and insights from multiple award-winning author and leadership expert herself, Zoe Routh. Now, on with the show.
Hey, it's Zoe. Have you ever experienced a moment that changed the direction of your life forever? Those moments are kind of cool, and my guest today shares one of the most pivotal moments he had when he changed his entire career trajectory. I can't wait to share him with you. So a couple of updates from me before I introduce our guest today. By the time you are listening to this, I will be halfway through, just about, my epic trek on the Larapinta. Now, that's also barring any travel restrictions that may pop up between me recording this, getting on a plane, and getting to the Northern Territory. A long-awaited journey is underway for me, and that is the trek on the Larapinta. It's one of the world's most extraordinary bushwalks, and I'm joining a group of other 7 bushwalkers on a public group, I guess. There'll be 8 of us bushwalkers and 2 guides. We're touring with Trek Larapinta. I cannot wait. It's just a beautiful landscape out in the desert just out of Alice Springs. So I've wanted to do this for years, ever since I took my first couple of leadership groups out there for a little bit of a taster, 4-day trips. But I'm out there for 16 days. I can't wait to share with you all the fabulous things that I'm going to see and experience on the trail. All right, so that's a little heads up from me. What else can I tell you? Yes, our guest today is Nick Tebbey. He's the National Executive Officer of Relationships Australia. This is the leading provider of relationship support services for kids, families, couples, communities, etc. Prior to that, he worked for a number of years in the social and community sectors, including as CEO of the Settlement Council of Australia. So before all this not-for-profit social justice work, Nick was actually a lawyer. So how do you go from being a lawyer to operating in that context? He shares all. I can't wait to bring him to you. So let's get into it. And before you do, I should also let you know that Nick is an amplifier. He's part of my esteemed group of amplifiers, high-level leaders, CEOs, managing directors, who gather quarterly and in between on webcasts to explore and expand their leadership capacity, to navigate complexity, to deal with tough leadership issues, and to elevate and extend the impact of their work in more extended circles. So if that sounds like you, geez, it would be great to have you on board. Check us out at zoerouth.com, click on programs, find amplifiers, and there you go. We'd love to see you there. So in the meantime, let's on with the show. Nick Tebbey, yay! We finally managed to get the tech, I think, sorted. And I am delighted to have you on the show. Welcome.
Thanks, Zoe. Really glad to be here.
Well, we've got a lot of exploring to go. And you are currently the National Executive Officer at Relationships Australia, which sounds like a massive job. And I want to know how you ended up there and doing that role, because no one sort of walks out of university or high school and goes, I'm going to end up there. So how did that happen?
Sure. Yeah. Look, I guess a lot of people's, it was an interesting journey through some different industries and different career paths. So when I walked out of university, it was into a job as a lawyer. And I worked as a lawyer for over a decade here in Canberra, doing a mixture of commercial law, not-for-profit law, and immigration law.
Wow.
And yeah, just to mix things up a little, and certainly have always had a real passion for those areas. And I think saw my work as a lawyer more in the area of helping people and working with people that were disadvantaged and needed someone to sort of support them, often in their dealings with the government, where, as you know, it can be quite a lopsided power imbalance between a heavily resourced government and a not so well-resourced individual. So that was really where I started and spent a lot of my time just building up my experience in legal issues and various issues affecting the community. So after about 10 years as a lawyer, I decided, I suppose, on one of those nighttime epiphanies that maybe it was time to do something a little bit different with my skills, and I can remember it well.
Did it involve a bottle of red wine and some soul searching?
No, it involved a newborn baby who was keeping me up at all hours of the morning. And yeah, my son had just been born, and I remember I was off work actually doing the little bit of parental leave that I was entitled to, while my wife was hopefully getting some sleep, trying to get the baby back to sleep, and just thinking, what is next, and what sort of world am I contributing to for this little being in my hands right now, and what do I want to be able to tell him when he grows up that I did. And so I took a leap and left behind my cushy senior associate role, left behind my cushy senior associate salary, and started working in a little not-for-profit that worked with migrants and refugees as a policy officer. So just looking at how we could influence government policy around the supports and services that are provided to migrants and refugees once they get to Australia. So that was called the Settlement Council of Australia, and it was all about helping people adjust to life in a new country. So it was really interesting. But in my time there, I sort of spent a while in that organisation and worked up to the CEO role, and did that in quite a quick. It was over the course of about 18 months, just because there was movement of people, and I guess I had a fair bit of experience in both the migration sector and the not-for-profit sector as a lawyer. So in that time, sort of started seeing that there was a whole lot to our social services system in Australia that maybe needed more advocacy and more attention to make sure the right people were receiving the services they needed, with the main view of helping people get back on their feet after they go through difficult times, whatever those times might be. And so when the opportunity came up to join the team at Relationships Australia, I had a look at their values and really what this organisation stands for, and I thought it was a really natural fit for me and for what I'm interested in. And so just over 2 years ago, I made the leap across to this role, and very happy to say that I'm enjoying it a lot, and I think contributing to some really important projects and initiatives here.
And for those who don't know, what does Relationships Australia do?
Sure. So Relationships Australia is a community service organisation, a charity that helps individuals, families, communities really strive for respectful and healthy relationships in all that we do. So we started off over 70 years ago as a marriage guidance council, helping soldiers returning from World War II readjust to the mundane civilian life that they were returning to, and try to, resume the relationships that they'd had before they'd gone off to war. So it was about helping couples, helping families stay together and navigate difficult times. Now, over the last 70 years, that's evolved really to look at all of the different aspects of life. As humans, we are built by the relationships that we have. Sometimes those relationships can be uncomfortable. Sometimes they're difficult. Sometimes they're dangerous. But nevertheless, we have to navigate those relationships and make sure we're safe and respected and happy. And so within that sort of broad category, there's a whole lot of different services that RA provides to the community and to the people who need those services. Really all about getting the most out of our relationships with ourselves, with our families, and with our broader community.
I love it. I'm so glad I invited you to be a guest on the show during this season, which is the theme is all about leading in complexity. And sounds like you've led in many sectors where complexity is the default, the norm, if you like, from, advocating for migrants to working in relationships and the court system, etc. What is your approach to leading in complexity?
Personally, and I'm often told this, my approach comes from a strong basis of optimism. I'm often told I'm a very optimistic person, sometimes perhaps to a fault, but I like to see the good in people and the opportunities in both difficult situations, complex situations, and happier times. So I like to come from a position of, there's a way through, and complexity is just adding layers of interesting components to whatever it is we're doing. So as long as we take the time to respect that complexity and understand it, then really within that comes all of these extra opportunities. So yeah, I like to come at things from a very optimistic point of view.
I think optimism is a good flavor to put on something as challenging as some of the issues that you're facing. So the work that you do now as executive officer, Do you tend to look at the systems in which the organization finds itself, like the court system, the government system? I know you probably did that for the other pieces of work that you were doing. So tell me a little bit about that. How does that work for you?
Yeah, no, that's a pretty good characterization of it, really. So in my role as the National Executive Officer, I head up a very small team, really, in the grand scheme of things when you look at RA as a federation. Each of the states and territories run their own service delivery businesses where they interact with government in terms of funding, and then they provide services to the members of the community. Our role here in the national office really is twofold. One is a public-facing role in terms of representing our federation, whether it's in discussions with government, advocacy around policy settings and improvements, and communications and engagement. And then an internal focused role, which is really looking at how the members of our federation work together, where there are opportunities for them to combine resources, to share knowledge, and to really, I guess, strive for excellence in terms of the services they deliver. So we act to support that and foster that collaboration, but also to represent it really to the public and to the government.
Okay. It just sounds complex. It sounds like a lot of pieces of the puzzle to juggle. I want to rewind a little bit and ask you about when was the first time you realized you could do the leadership thing? Was it a particular incident? I think I can do this thing.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I've always been someone who has enjoyed those sorts of roles. I don't shy away from the idea of working with other people and trying to bring out the best in other people. I enjoy seeing the people around me succeed and achieve great things. And I can look back to sort of high school and college when I was involved in student representative councils and things like that. And I guess it was always sort of in my nature just to want to contribute. And I think that's where it really did come from. Early on in my life as a student, it was instilled in me by teachers and by my parents that giving back and being part of something bigger than yourself is really important. I did a lot of volunteering, and in addition to my schoolwork, I was working with a couple of environmental groups in Canberra that just sort of, by their very nature, they wanted people to stand up and have a voice. And so I found myself in roles where I was actually perhaps outside of my comfort zone, really, talking to politicians as a young kid, and having to really carry on like I knew what I was talking about and that I deserved a seat at the table. So that's something that I've always enjoyed, that sort of thrill that comes with speaking and being heard. And I think that's just been a natural progression from there.
I love that. I'm not sure which I love more, the fact that you had this sense of contribution and community from an early age, or that you got a rush from doing it. And I think that's beautiful because it actually does speak to some of the challenges we face as leaders, is that we become leaders because we want to do good for others, and we get nominated or encouraged into these roles of responsibility and authority. And then we find it's quite energizing to have a voice at the table and to be heard. And that's one of the traps of power, as Dacher Keltner said in his book, The Power Paradox, which I think is an amazing book. And you just spoke to it beautifully, saying, yep, I was taught that it's a good thing to do, and I like doing it, and it was good for me and good for the community. What is one of the things that you're most proud of as a leader?
Look, there's a lot of things that I think I can look back on and say, wow, I'm really proud I was involved in that, or I was part of that journey. And I think, when I look at my time with a really small organization that was looking after this migrant settlement paradox and the challenges there, when you actually see the work that you're doing influencing not just big things like government policy and actually getting changes to government policy, but individuals and feedback from people who were actually benefiting from the types of services that we were promoting and really advocating on behalf of, it gives you a reason to sit back and say, wow, there's something important in what we're doing here. And I think that carries through to my role here, is when we spend a lot of our time talking, asking for change, advocating around issues. And occasionally you get those glimmers when someone in a decision-making position actually looks at you and is like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And just think how many lives we could improve if we made this little change or tweaked the way this program is delivered. And so I think when you look at those sorts of situations, it's really easy to actually be quite proud of the work that you're doing on the whole.
That's great. Is there one particular change that you remember?
Yeah, I think there was a really interesting time, without getting too much into the detail of it, when we were in the settlement council, when the government was looking at introducing changes to the English language requirement for migrants and really trying to up the onus on new migrants coming to Australia to have higher levels of English language ability, which, we always say in order to settle successfully in a country like Australia, being able to communicate is obviously really important. But putting too much of that pressure on people who've just shipped their lives halfway across the world, sometimes as refugees in, incredibly traumatic circumstances, and then forcing them into really regimented systems around English language, we just saw time and time again it wasn't working. And so we're able to bring some of that evidence to the table and succeeded in getting the government to soften its stance and basically say we'll take a more supportive role to helping people learn English rather than this sort of strict mandated requirement. And I think that was a really positive, it was all about being there to support people who we knew wanted to learn English but were struggling with it, and actually encouraging them in ways that wasn't using a big stick.
I like that example. It's another example of how we take for granted the norms. And when we sit within the broader norms of a culture, we forget that is an obstacle for other people. We take our language for granted. We take our privilege in many other different ways for granted. So, every leader has its success and every leader has its failures, their failures. When did you experience a significant challenge that was a great learning opportunity for you?
I've learned a lot since coming into this new role at Relationships Australia, and certainly there have been some moments that were quite challenging. I think the first one was that I left my comfort zone to a certain extent because I was no longer in that migrant and refugee sector. Relationships Australia is much broader in who it works for, and there was a lot to learn about the different challenges facing different groups in the community and the different approach that government takes to that. So there was a very steep learning curve, and that in itself was challenging, although it's a challenge you can sort of really get stuck into and enjoy. But I think the other thing is when I came here, I had a much bigger team of staff than I was used to working with. And so perhaps my greatest challenge has been navigating different personalities in a team, working with different expectations in senior team members or people who'd been around a lot longer than I had in their roles. And I guess establishing an authority or a reason for being here that was respectable and that people deemed worthwhile, when I knew that I was stepping into very big shoes that had to be filled and trying to carry on a legacy that had built some really fantastic and important things. So navigating that and trying to make a role my own has been a challenge, but it's been a good one. And I think, it's safe to say I'm still here. So something's going right.
What did you learn about yourself through that?
I learned that I have a lot of resilience, and that I was able, and perhaps it's my optimism coming through again, I was able to navigate some really difficult conversations and difficult periods with a view to what the end goal was and is. And I learned that there are a lot of people out there who actually want to see you succeed and want to support you in that. And perhaps I learned that asking for help and taking advice from others is something that I maybe didn't do as often as I could have or should have in previous roles. And so here, my job has become very collaborative and very team focused. And I've learned that I'm much better than I perhaps even thought I was at shelving my own views or my own experiences and really listening to others, taking their advice and working with them on things. And I think that's only a really positive way to approach things. So that's been a big learning curve.
Yeah. And it's sobering too, right? So it's like, I'm not the smartest tool in the toolbox. Is that even the right thing?
Sharpest, yeah, something like
sharpest tool in the toolbox. Yeah. It's very humbling. And you being such an optimist, I'm going to go to the F word here. So failure, do you feel like you've experienced any failure in your world?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there are definitely things I look back on and think I could have handled that differently. And if I had, I'm sure things wouldn't have turned out the way they did in respect of that person or that issue. So I think there are things that I would certainly say are failings. But I think overall it's, positive and certainly, every step, even the ones that have been quite difficult, have been in the right direction.
It's really helpful for people to hear about other people's failures. Can you give us an example of that? Of course, without breaching confidentiality and getting yourself into hot water.
No, that's fine. Yeah, I think perhaps, if you could categorize it, it's around personalities and really understanding the personalities of the people in your team. And I think perhaps I took for granted that, where I was used to certain hierarchies and structures in an organization, there were things that were both really personal to some of the people, but also just the way things were done when I stepped into this role that were different. And so I think perhaps I oversimplified in my mind what needed to be done, and I didn't really focus on the detail of it. And I think some people perhaps felt like as a result of that, they were taken for granted and they weren't valued in their roles anymore. And so, it's taken a lot of time to build up people again and say, well, actually, no, everyone, certainly those who are in the team now, you've all got a really important role to play, and we're all working together in this. And I don't want anyone ever again to feel like they're not valued for the work that they do.
That's really helpful. And it speaks to some of the triggers I list in People Stuff around, status and fairness being significant triggers for people that put them into one of the four devils behaviors, that unhelpful, conflicted, challenging responses to stuff. So it sounds like you had to navigate some of that.
Definitely. Yep.
Okay. Well, good for you. And that's another sobering experience too, when you go, oh, I didn't intend for you to feel like you were trod on and ignored. And oopsie, let's start over and see if we can smooth that over and do better. What is something that you've had to overcome in order to be a leader? Is there anything that you feel like that was a mountain to climb or a barrier to get over?
I think for myself personally, part of it probably is overcoming, and I think it's a pride or an ego thing, where I'm used to, or I certainly was used to, being the person in the room who knew the most or equally as much as anyone else, and being comfortable with sitting with the idea that I actually had a lot to learn. And that didn't necessarily matter. That didn't mean I couldn't do my job, but it meant I had to remember to respect others around me and draw on others' strengths. And so I think overcoming the idea that I had to be everything to everyone at every time was really important. And I learned that the hard way. It didn't always work out. And certainly there's still some areas where, building trust based on that position and probably reshaping my idea of leadership a bit and therefore influencing those who view my leadership to say, well, look, it's okay that there are people who know more or have more experience in this area. That's actually just an important part of being a leader, is that you then draw on those strengths as much as you draw on your own. So I think it's really calibrating from an area where I was sort of at times the only person in the organization. So I was the CEO and the cleaner, to an organization where there are a greater number of people. So there are experts in their fields, and I don't need to challenge them for that title, but I can make the most of them and help them really flourish. And so, yeah, it's almost like saying, really being more of or viewing my role as more of a team player than a solo player, I think was probably one of my biggest learning curves.
Mm. And if I was to map that, what you've just described, it's a classic transition from being an expert, the person with all the information and all the expertise, to being an achiever. So I'm talking about the transition in the leadership maturity framework, where we go from that person who gets their sense of ego and the sense of their identity from their expertise to someone who shifts that definition to someone who can leverage the talents of others. And it is a scary transition. It's very destabilizing.
Yeah, and if you think back to, over a decade as a lawyer, where everything came down to how much of an expert you were, when you were sitting across from a client, they wanted answers. When you were sitting across the table from another lawyer in a negotiation or something, you had to know exactly what you were talking about and what you were asking for and why. And that was a very solitary, expert-driven process. And I think now I'm in a completely different headspace because of the role that I have now.
Yeah. Absolutely. And it is interesting to watch the transition from lawyer to leader in that particular way that you've journeyed, also from a commercial environment into a not-for-profit one. And I think you've been in the Amplifiers program for about 6 months. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah, just about. Yeah.
So in joining the program, what were you hungry to learn more of?
I think my number one aim and goal is still around the team piece. And I've really enjoyed the work we've done in the last quarter about how to really promote and encourage your team in a way that ticks all the boxes and gets everyone working in the same really successful and motivated mindset. So for me, learning a lot about that part of myself that needs to be sufficiently skilled up in terms of working with a team and getting the most out of your team, that's been a real focus.
Yeah. And that's sort of your next transition, really, isn't it? Like working through that, being an achiever about harnessing the talents of others, to being an amplifier, someone who can elevate other leaders and cultivate leadership in others.
Yes. Yeah.
How do you go about doing that? How do you go about cultivating leadership in others?
Look, I think it's very much still a work in progress. But I think right now, I keep coming back to this idea that I really want everyone around me to feel respected and valued for their opinions and to be given space to take on more of a leadership in terms of their projects or their particular areas of work. So it's really stepping back and giving people that space to do those things, being their number one cheerleader and supporter in what they're doing, and obviously being there to help debrief when things get tough or even when they've gone really well. It's always important to debrief. So I see, with certain members of my team, a real willingness to engage with me in that process where they can sort of grow into their role, knowing that they've got my support, but that they don't need me there to hold their hand in everything they do. And I think that's been paying off in dividends over the last few months.
In which way?
Or just seeing people really take responsibility and step up. And, where I suppose coming back to some of the complexities of the nature of our role, it's all about innovation and coming up with new and better ways of doing things, more efficient ways of doing things. And so actually seeing these ideas that, I would freely say I would never have come up with that. But they're coming from these people in my team who are saying, well, we could do this, or why don't we suggest that? And just seeing this, it's a really fertile ground for innovation. And I think that's, just really exciting.
That is exciting. So I want to do a little compare contrast. So at the start of the interview, we talked about, your first experience as a leader, and it was all about how energizing it was to be seen and heard. Now, fast forward a decade plus or more. And where do you get energized now?
I certainly see, the most energizing thing for me is when I'm sitting around the table with my team and there's this firing of ideas and support, like seeing them support each other and support me and what I'm doing and support, I guess, the organization to achieve its strategic goals. I think that's really, you can sit back at the end of the day and say, yeah, we're working as one cohesive group towards a really exciting end goal. And that in itself is incredibly energizing. I won't lie to you. I still get energized by having opportunities to just talk and convince and influence people. So I think that part of me is still there and probably always will be. So having that opportunity to do that. But I think now I'm doing it in a way that I know it's less about me and it's more about the why we're here and what we're doing. And so when I'm influencing and talking now, I'm really coming from a point of view where I'm supported by a team, where I'm talking sometimes on behalf of or with my team, and we're all, using our different strengths and skills for the same end goal. So I think that's pretty exciting.
Wow, that's a beautiful expand and include example. So you've brought the I like to be heard thing along with you. It's not like, oh, I don't care if people don't hear me. It's like, no, I really do like that still. And as we grow as leaders, we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's like there is an important aspect of being seen, heard. And I love the way that you've characterized the shift for you, that it's not just about you, the expert. It's actually about the purpose and the contribution. And that's the shift of development that's occurred for you over this time. Shifting tracks a little, tracks? tactics, direction. I want to get into some tangible takeaways for listeners. Have you got a favorite book or podcast that has affected you in a positive way that you would recommend to others?
Look, I really love listening to podcasts, and I love podcasts that just make me think and focus on things like our relationships with the people around us and how to get the most out of them. So, for example, Gottman's Small Things Often is a really brilliant podcast because it's short grabs of, often it's really talking about our relationships with our loved ones in our lives, but it gives this great perspective of, what we could be doing. It doesn't cost us very much at all, but it can make a huge difference in our relationships with the people around us. And some of the lessons I've got from that, I can bring into my work and the way I interact with the people around me. So I reckon that's one that it's a little bit out of left field. It's not directly a leadership podcast, but it's certainly one that has had quite an influence on the way I conduct myself.
What's it called? Gottman's Small Things?
Gottman's Small Things Often.
Gottman? Is that like somebody's
name? The Gottman
name?
Institute. Yeah.
Okay. And how do you spell Gottman?
Gottman.
Okay. Gottman Small Things Often. All right. We'll make sure that there's a link in the show notes for that. All right. And probably my last question, what would be your key tip for leaders who are listening in terms of being a better leader?
Look, I think probably coming back to some of the things we've talked about, being really present and self-aware. I think for me, it's been, the important things have been being flexible and willing to change and adapt to the people around me. But I think it's even one step back from that. It's actually just to make sure in all that I do, I'm really conscious of what's driving the people that I'm interacting with or working with, what's perhaps stopping them or challenging them, and ways that we can then work through those issues, or that they can be empowered to work through those issues. So I think it's really about awareness of myself and awareness of the people that I'm working with, and actually taking a step back every now and then and asking myself those sorts of questions that are outside of the what we're doing, and maybe even a bit outside of the why we're doing something, but actually what's behind that for the individual, what's behind it for me, what's perhaps driving me right now, what's driving the people I'm interacting with. And I think that sort of awareness goes a long way to just being able to be quite empathetic and respond to some of the motivations that might be impacting people. And I think I've found that's probably, something that's a really great way, coming back to what I said earlier, relationships are so important to us as humans. The way we relate to the people around us needs to be respectful and conscious of what they're going through. And that's just one small way that I think people can perhaps do that better.
That's beautiful. Nick Tebbey, you're a superstar. Thank you so much for coming on this show. This has been just a delight to hear your story and your insights and a little bit of your journey.
Well, thank you. I'm really glad to have the opportunity to talk, and I hope other people might find it a bit interesting.
I'm sure they will. That was a fun interview. I really loved talking with Nick. He is such an insightful leader. I love his focus on developing other leaders and the ability to press pause and really think about the people around the table that he's working with, and getting the joy of helping others succeed. And this is actually a profound shift in our leadership development. When we can do that, when we can steer the gaze of our concerns away from our own development to that of others, this is a significant milestone for us. And it takes focus. It takes the ability to delegate well. And we need to dial down our humility and dial up our curiosity on other people. And we need the space to do that. So in order to do that, we need to cultivate some specific things as amplifiers out in the world. And I think Nick has done that beautifully, and he's expressed and shared his journey in a lovely way. So thank you, Nick, for being such a great guest. Our next interview coming up is with Luca Perry. Luca Perry is a remarkable human. We had a very fabulous, interesting conversation about all things future and complexity. He is an education futurist, and he does a lot of speaking and work in that arena. And he's had quite an interesting journey as well. So I can't wait for you to enjoy that interview coming up. Lastly, if you're excited about the content that you're experiencing and you're intrigued by the leadership development journey that Nick and others are on, consider joining us on our program Amplifiers. We have a Canberra-based group, and we also have an international-based group that you can access through our virtual program. You can get all the details at zoerouth.com. Click on programs and click on amplifiers. Would love to meet you and have you join the group if you're up to having your results improve year after year and to have an impact that is bigger and better. Okay, in the meantime, live well, lead well.
You've been listening to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast with leadership expert Zoe Routh. For more about people stuff and to contact Zoe, go to zoerouth.com.